You go by many titles. Dad,
It's time to get out.
No.
night manager, and carpool captain.
Hey guys, let's go, come on. Everybody in.
So adding a student title might feel daunting. But what if a school could be there for all of you? Career, family, finances, and mental health. National University believes supporting all your titles can lead to another one. Successful graduate. National University, supporting the whole you. Learn more at nu.edu.
Hello everyone, my name's Ray and I'm here with Chris, and today on History You Didn't Know But Should, we're going to be talking about the presidential elections of 1824 and 1876.
And I think it's a great opportunity that we're coming together today talking about these two really fascinating elections, especially as we're in the middle of a presidential election that has seen just about anything and everything that you could throw at it. And so I think that there are some parallels that we'll see as we compare these two elections with the 2020 election. So I look forward to sharing them with you.
Absolutely. I think these two elections are very important today, especially, if we look at the possible outcomes of the 2020 election and how it could very closely parallel one or both of these elections. So let's get into the election of 1824. Of course, in 1824, we're coming out of the so-called era of good feelings. James Monroe, his presidency. The nation has, at least on the surface, been sort of united. Of course, we know what's on the surface isn't always what's going on below the surface, and I think the election of 1824 sort of reveals some of that stuff that's going on beneath the veneer of good feelings.
Yeah, there's been this bubbling of angst, if you will, that has been rising up. And then in 1824, we have sort of what we saw in 2020, especially with the Democratic Party, where there were so many different candidates that were interested, wanting to run for this particular position. But, at the end of the day, on paper, there probably was no candidate that was more qualified for the presidency than John Quincy Adams.
Absolutely.
Who, of course, was the son of John Adams, both being from Massachusetts. And I think that we start to see the tale of two tapes, if you will, or the tale of the tape, where you have Adams. Here is this studied at Harvard, served under James Madison as a U.S. minister to Russia. And, he's just kind of a aristocracy, if you will. And then you have the working man, the military leader, the powerful Andrew Jackson. And those are probably the two that we really would want to focus on for 1824. And Ray, isn't it interesting? Maybe we want to talk about how important it is for people to see the different characteristics of a president. That it's not basically what you're able to do, but it's also how you relate to the people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you look at John Quincy Adams in this case, and Andrew Jackson, Andrew Jackson, especially in the South, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, etc., he's a man of the people. He is seen as being much more close to the people, and someone like John Quincy Adams is seen as being, I wouldn't say aristocracy, but he's seen as being more distant maybe than someone like Andrew Jackson was. And I think that helped Andrew Jackson. If you look at the outcome of the election, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, all go to Andrew Jackson, including Pennsylvania. But you have that real southern rural push for Andrew Jackson, and I think that relates to 2020 as well, where we have, if you look at the electoral map 2016 and what it may look like in 2020, you see with Donald Trump this rural push.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that goes along that we can see comparison from 1824 and 2020, the one thing that John Quincy Adams does not have, he does not have any charisma.
No.
And if you look at John Quincy Adams, here's this guy, he's bald, he's short, he's grumpy, yeah, and he's just frumpy. Even though he's an avid swimmer, he's very portly, right?
He is John Adams' son, after all.
Absolutely, yeah. And he, not only is that his image, but he is also very standoffish. Mm-hmm. That people have a hard time really getting to relate to him, get to know him, because, he's not a friend of the people or the man of the people. And then in comparison, you have Andrew Jackson, this military leader, this hardworking, man of the fields. And if you compare
Battle
that,
of New Orleans.
the hero. Just the hero of New Orleans. And if you compare that to 2020, many people have said what has kept President Trump in the 2020 race has been his charisma.
Oh, yeah.
The way that he draws thousands of people to stand outside in the cold to listen to him, talk for an hour and 15 minutes. And whereas, Vice President Biden, who is more standoffish, wanting to wear a mask, wanting to honk if you love me, but just didn't have that charisma. And I think as we're seeing the 2020 election, just as we see the 1824 election, that does matter.
Oh, absolutely. Andrew Jackson, I think if he were alive today, he would be very much like Donald Trump, wanting that crowd there, wanting that applause, that live in-person rally to really draw that energy. I think that is a very good comparison. Now, of course, we've been talking about Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. And by the way, all of these candidates in 1824 are Democratic Republicans. The Federalists, pretty much off the scene since 1816. They ran a guy called Rufus King, and that was sort of the end of the Federalists. But there are two other, as far as the presidency is concerned, there are two other candidates in this one. William Crawford of Georgia, and of course Henry Clay. Do you want to talk a little bit about Henry Clay?
Yeah, Henry Clay, who was born in Virginia, but then actually hailed from Kentucky, and he wanted to be known as the candidate of the West. He wanted to be the guy, and I think that he was a little miffed at Andrew Jackson and the attention that Jackson was receiving, because Henry Clay said, wait a second, I have served as not just a Speaker of the House, but I'm a pretty powerful Speaker of the House. And you've got this guy Jackson, who is just this working man who did something good in the military. Don't discount that, but that's really all he's got. He doesn't really know how to spell, doesn't really know how to read or write, and you want him over me. And so, Clay starts advocating this thing called the American system, where he really wants to improve transportation, he wants to improve agriculture, but he wants to do it by raising taxes. He believes that taxation is going to have to happen. And of course, he wants to preserve the National Bank. And, well, we know how Jackson feels about the National Bank.
And, you think about, I'm running for president, and my platform is I think we need to raise taxes. Right. That's not a winning message. I don't think it was
Read my lips.
Yeah. I don't think it was a winning message in 1824. Certainly wouldn't be a winning message in 2020. So we look at this. We also have a guy called William Crawford from Georgia. Crawford is, for me, he's a little bit of a sad story. He's running for president, and he actually, when we talk about the electoral vote count, he actually comes in third in the Electoral College, but he suffers a stroke in 1823, and by the time the election comes around, he's pretty much paralyzed and almost blind. So he's really out of the race by the time election day, as we call it, comes around.
But what's interesting about Crawford is, though he has had this debilitating stroke, and though he's on death's bed, what does he not do? He doesn't quit.
No.
He doesn't get out of the race. No. He is still in the race and is still going on. And so that kind of leads us to, Election Day in 1824 was a little different than well, maybe not, because in 1824 it wasn't just on a beautiful autumn day in November you go to the polls, but instead those votes would start to accumulate as time went on. And so, you see this contest is extending as we go, and I think that the results of the voting exposed a divided America.
Oh, absolutely.
And you mentioned that earlier, talking about the states that Jackson carried and some of the states that Adams will carry and others. But, if we look at the four major candidates, Jackson wins 99 electoral votes. He's got 152,000 roughly popular votes.
Right.
Adams has 84 electoral votes, 114,000. So, right now it's looking good for Jackson. Don't forget Crawford, because here's the guy who's had a stroke. He's about to die, but yet he gets 47,000 people. And then the one guy who really wanted it, probably more than everybody else, Henry Clay, winds out being last.
Yeah, and Henry Clay, he wanted the presidency, and as Speaker of the House, he saw himself on the steps of becoming president. Now he's, according to the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, he's out of the runnings because, as you pointed out there, nobody got the majority electoral votes, which in 1824 would have been 131 votes.
And that's the
Nobody
key.
and nobody got near it. I mean, Jackson came the closest, which would have been 99 votes, and of course Adams came in second, Crawford came in third, and then Henry Clay, dragging up the caboose with 37 votes. And then, Henry Clay's out, so he has to go back to the House of Representatives and be the Speaker of the House. William Crawford's pretty much out of the running, so you're basically down to Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams when this election goes to the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and I think that is interesting that, Henry Clay, though you said he was like driving the caboose, very quickly when he comes back to the Speaker of the House, he gets in the engine real quick and recognizes that there is some bitterness that he still has, but he can now become, I don't want to say he becomes like a kingmaker, but he basically is going to have enormous influence as the Speaker of the House and being able to decide what's going to happen. And he will actually bring in another guy when we start talking about John Calhoun of South Carolina.
Yeah.
He'll start bringing in Calhoun, and Calhoun basically, he had originally wanted the presidency, but he didn't have a chance to get it, and so he basically said, well, maybe I'll just run for vice president, and I can do something for vice president. But Calhoun doesn't like Jackson or John Quincy Adams.
That's right.
So these two guys start to team up, and I thought what was interesting is they actually had for a brief moment the idea, well, why not put Crawford in, the guy that's going to die, because if he dies,
you could put
there you go.
Calhoun in.
That's exactly
Absolutely.
right. So we see how politics in 1824 was still being played and using the power behind that. So what happens?
Well, go ahead. What happens, I think, when it gets to the House of Representatives, as you've already indicated, is Henry Clay really pushes this toward John Quincy Adams because, he doesn't like Andrew Jackson. Calhoun does not like Andrew Jackson. And so what happens is John Quincy Adams really comes out on top here, and he gets the presidency, even though if you look at the Electoral College, he was behind Jackson. If you look at the popular vote, he was some 44,000 votes behind Andrew Jackson. But because it went to the House of Representatives and Henry Clay there, like you said, he's out of the caboose and he's in the engine, he's able to swing that thing to John Quincy Adams, and John Quincy Adams becomes president. Then that's when it gets really interesting, because what's one of the first things Adam does when he becomes president?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And understand that rumors are already flying.
Oh, yeah.
The rumors are that Adams has made some kind of underhanded deal to get Clay's support that basically says, okay, if you win, then I get this.
Right.
And what, of
that
course,
corrupt
happens,
bargain.
There you go.
Where Henry Clay is made Secretary of State, was it? Yeah.
Yes.
Henry Clay is made Secretary of State, and of course that just drives Andrew Jackson up a wall, because this was a corrupt bargain. This election was stolen from him. And if I'm in Andrew Jackson's skin at that moment, I can certainly understand where he's coming from.
And Andrew Jackson, who, by the way, has many really fabulous nicknames, Old Hickory, but also Sharp Knife. So the first day of Adams' presidency, Andrew Jackson saying, hey, I had the most votes. I had the most electoral votes. I had the most popular votes. I've been cheated out of the presidency. And on day one, he will make sure he spends the remaining part of from 1824 to the next election doing everything that he can to ensure that John Quincy Adams will not serve a second term, and that Andrew Jackson somehow will come in and be president. And so we find that what really happens is from 1824 to 1828, Andrew Jackson spends a lot of time just character assassinating John Quincy Adams. And if John Quincy Adams said the sky was blue, Andrew Jackson would say the guy is off his rocker. It's not blue. He's lost.
This all sounds familiar to me.
And we're talking 1824,
Sounds
but we're
familiar.
also living in 2020, and all of this is happening. Now, we
Yeah.
didn't hear if he was sleepy or not, or if he was hiding in his basement, but we do know
Was
that...
Andrew Jackson wearing a mask? That's the question.
That's the question. But we do know that John Quincy Adams, he might not have been in the basement, but we do know that he had some really nice equipment in the White House. And he had used what Andrew Jackson later said was financial means to be able to have some really nice personal stuff. So
Yeah.
the character assassination really starts pretty quick.
And then you get the election of 1828, and it gets nasty. Maybe
Yes.
one day we'll come back and talk about the election of 1828 because all the accusations fly. I love it when people say politics is so dirty today, and I'm like, go back to 1828.
So yeah, and so you think about 1824 and you say, okay, so we've learned our lesson. Well, we know 2020 that we didn't learn our lesson in 1824, but let's fast forward a little bit to 1876, because I think that 1876 really ties into 2020, in which it tested the Constitution.
Oh yeah.
Maybe like the Constitution had never been tested before, and we're starting to see the Constitution being tested once again in 2020. So let's talk about the results of the presidency or the election of 1876, because would you agree that basically at the end of the day when the votes were tallied that what we found was that the election was a mess?
It was a big mess. I mean, when election day is over, so to speak, there were two candidates, Ohio's Rutherford B. Hayes and New York's Samuel Tilden. Hayes is the Republican, Tilden is the Democrat. I think when both men go to bed, so to speak, on election night, they think Tilden's won.
Right.
And of course, it becomes very clear that there are states in dispute here. There are basically three states in dispute. You have South Carolina, Louisiana, and echoes of 2000, Florida. You have a situation with a single elector out in Oregon, and that could make a potential difference here. But when it comes down to it, it's disputed who actually won these 20 odd. I think it was exactly 20 electoral college votes between those three states.
Yeah, and once again, as we go back and look at 1824, we're now looking in 1876, and we see that Samuel Tilden, who was the governor of New York, very popular, he had a lead of about 260,000 popular votes. But the problem is while he had 260,000 popular vote lead, he only had 184 electoral votes,
Right.
which meant that he was still short of being able to defeat Rutherford B. Hayes. And, as you mentioned, Florida, South Carolina, Louisiana, all in dispute, and that was 19 electoral votes. And of course, the
And
one
the Oregon,
from Oregon. And
Yep.
so, in this situation, the U.S. Constitution basically didn't have a way out of the mess.
And the Constitution in 1876 has really, we're not too far out from the Civil War. And we've really had a very difficult time. You had a civil war that absolutely, obviously divided the nation. The nation split in half. You have a presidential assassination, a vice president, Andrew Johnson, who becomes president and is arguably not the man for the hour. Then you have Ulysses S. Grant comes in, and he serves 2 terms. Maybe the first term went a little better than the second term, but we're still on the heels of Reconstruction here. Reconstruction is actually going to come to an end during Rutherford B. Hayes' during his presidency. So we're on the heels of this constitutional crisis, and here, right at the moment, you would think we don't need yet another constitutional crisis. At the end of the election day, nobody reaches the necessary majority votes in the Electoral College.
And how interesting is it that in 1876, the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives,
Right.
and the Republicans dominated the Senate. Once again, we start seeing the parallels to 2020. But here's where the difference from 2020 and 1876 come in. Because in 1876, what the House and the Senate do is they actually create a bipartisan commission.
Yep.
So they actually, it's hard to believe, I know, but the House and the Senate
They worked together.
and actually said, we're going to create this bipartisan electoral commission. We'll have 5 representatives, we'll have 5 senators, and let's bring in that other branch of government, the judicial branch, and let's include 5 Supreme Court justices.
Yeah.
Now, we say that they had bipartisan. We say that they seemed like in this situation, they're all friends, they all want to do the right thing, but we have to remember they're still Democrats and they're still Republicans. And so though the commission was supposed to have all of these things basically being bipartisan, what we really quickly find out, it's not bipartisan at all, is it?
Oh no, the results of it show that politics and party were still very much driving this commission and how it actually turned out, because both sides, both Democrat and Republican, were in it for what they thought they could get. And the Democrats, especially Southern Democrats, really wanted the remaining federal troops out of the South. The Republicans really wanted the White House, and they were able to strike a deal, so to speak, based on those desires that both parties had.
And what happens, just to kind of make this long story short, is so you have the bipartisan commission that comes together, and you've got it basically comes out there's an equal mix of Democrats and Republicans, but there was this one guy who was actually a Supreme Court justice, and his name was David Davis. And David Davis actually decides to drop out of the commission. He got a Senate seat that was offered to him. So he drops out. He was a Supreme Court justice. He leaves the justice. He becomes a senator. And so then all of a sudden, a Republican is named to replace him. So that bipartisan equality is now gone.
It's gone.
You have Republicans that has one vote more than what the Democrats do. And when the vote comes in the Electoral Commission to decide the next president of the United States, one electoral vote.
Yeah, because they give all 20 votes from Louisiana, South Carolina, Florida, and Oregon. They give all of them to Rutherford B. Hayes, and Rutherford B. Hayes ends up at 185 votes to Samuel Tilden's 184 votes, which is where Samuel Tilden started off the election night. So, this really, in many ways, robbed Samuel Tilden of his election
and legacy.
And his legacy. Even during Rutherford B. Hayes' presidency, there were people who called him Rutherford Hayes. Right. He was a fraud. He was not a legitimate president. And I can imagine if something like this were to happen today, where it ends up in the House of Representatives, and I think we could see this. It is possible. After all, this is 2020, and anything can happen in 2020.
Right.
You could see whoever wins in the House of Representatives, it being the same thing.
And I think it comes back to us once again recognizing that there are valuable lessons to be learned in history, even in the studying of presidential elections. The problem is that we seem to forget our history. And we seem to forget the ideas that elections should be fair, should be balanced, and that every person should have a vote, and that it should properly be recorded. And yes, as we see in today's society, courts are involved. We see Democrats, we see Republicans, but through the elections of 1824 and 1876, both nasty, both divided, but we made it through them.
Yeah, absolutely. We make it through it, and something, a word I've sort of caught on with lately is catastrophizing. We live in a society that everything's a catastrophe. We catastrophize everything. We catastrophize every election, and this election probably more than others. If this person wins, the worst outcome will happen. If this person wins, the worst will happen. And, I'm a big believer in our Constitution, in our Federalist system. It's got plenty of checks and balances that would prevent the worst from actually happening.
Yeah, and the last thing that I will say about this is we started talking about doing this topic before the polls opened.
Yes.
We're now talking about this after the polls have closed.
Yep.
We're still here. The sun is still shining.
That's right.
We're at work today. We're still talking about history. We're still studying history. So I think there's a reminder that even in the chaos, there can still be peace. We've just got to find a way to bring peace to all people. So I appreciate this. Very interesting. I love talking with you about it. I thought you made some great points today, and hope our listeners enjoyed what we had to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And we look forward to coming back next week. We're trying to put up a new episode every Wednesday. Next week, our episode's a really good one, Chris. It's on Moores Creek down in southeastern North Carolina. That was one we recorded actually before we recorded this one, but we're going to go ahead and put it out next week. And then we're going to be looking at the Battle of the Elizabethtown, North Carolina, in the following week. So we got some interesting episodes coming up here in the first season of History You Didn't Know But Should.
What if a school could be there for all of you? Career, family, finances, and mental health? Well, it can. National University, supporting the whole you. Learn more at nu.edu.